The Alpha King demanded answers. The elders lied. So he broke the seal to the Forbidden Wing and found the woman the pack had erased from history. But let me take you back. Back to the moment everything fractured. Back to when power itself began to bleed through the cracks of a lie too heavy to hold. The storm came without warning, tearing through the mountains like a beast with teeth made of wind and ice. It wasn't natural. Nothing about this territory had been natural for weeks now. The borders flickered like dying flames. Wolves collapsed mid-shift, their bodies rejecting the change as though the very earth beneath them had gone sour. And the elders? They gathered in hushed circles, whispering prayers to gods they'd stopped believing in decades ago. Damien felt it first in his bones. A pull. A wrongness that scraped against his instincts like claws on stone. He was the Alpha King, the apex of his kind, the one wolf in 1,000 territories who could taste power shifts in the air the way others tasted rain. And this? This was more than a shift. This was a hemorrhage. He stood at the edge of the central compound, snow biting at his face, his breath misting in the frigid air. Behind him, the pack house loomed, all dark timber and ancient stone, a fortress built on secrets older than memory. But there was one part of it no one spoke about. One wing sealed off by iron and ritual, hidden behind walls that shouldn't exist. The Forbidden Wing. He'd asked about it once, years ago, when he first took the throne. The elders had gone pale. They'd told him it was empty. Abandoned. A relic of wars long past, nothing more. And he'd believed them because he'd had no reason not to. Until now. Until the power bleeding through the territories started pulsing from that exact location. Until he felt her. He didn't know it was a her yet. But something in his chest recognized the signature of that energy, ancient and raw and somehow familiar, like a song he'd heard in a dream he couldn't remember. The elders tried to stop him. Of course they did. When he demanded entry to the sealed wing, they formed a wall of trembling bodies and desperate excuses. The structure is unstable, they said. The magic there is corrupted. You'll endanger the entire pack. Lies. All of it. He could smell their fear, sharp and acrid, laced with something worse. Guilt. So he did what kings do when their counsels fail them. He tore the door open himself. The seal shattered like glass under his hands, ancient runes flaring white-hot before crumbling to ash. The iron groaned, then gave way, and the door, thick as a man's torso and carved with symbols meant to bind, to suppress, to erase, swung open on hinges that screamed. The air that rushed out was wrong. Stale. Dead. But beneath it, he caught the scent of something alive. Something struggling. Someone. He stepped inside, and the temperature dropped so fast his breath froze mid-exhale. The corridor stretched before him, narrow and suffocating, lit only by the pale glow of failing enchantments etched into the walls. They pulsed weakly, like dying heartbeats, and with each flicker he saw them scratches. Claw marks. Deep gouges in the stone as though someone had tried to tear their way out with bare hands. His wolf surged forward, protective and furious in equal measure. Who had been kept here? And why? The hallway opened into a single chamber, and that's when he saw her. She was huddled in the corner, her body so still he almost mistook her for a statue. Almost. But then she lifted her head, and the world stopped. Her eyes were silver. Not the soft gray of moonlight, but true silver, burning with a light that shouldn't exist. They locked onto him with the intensity of a cornered predator, wild and wary and utterly unbroken despite everything this place had tried to do to her. She was thin. Too thin. Her clothes were little more than rags, hanging off a frame that had been starved and neglected. But it was the scars that made his breath catch. They covered her arms, her shoulders, her collarbone, ritual marks, precise and cruel, carved into her skin in patterns meant to bind, to suppress, to silence. And around her throat, a collar. Not metal, but something worse. Spelled leather, etched with runes that glowed faintly in the darkness, pulsing in time with her ragged breathing. It was choking her. Not physically, but spiritually. He could feel it strangling her wolf, crushing the animal beneath layers of magic so thick it made his teeth ache. She didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at him with those burning eyes, and he realized she was waiting. Waiting to see if he was another jailer. Another hand come to press her deeper into the dark. The air between them crackled, charged with a tension so thick it felt like the moment before lightning strikes. His wolf roared inside him, a sound of recognition and rage and something else. Something primal. Mate. No, that wasn't possible. His Luna had died. Years ago. The pack had mourned her. They'd burned her pyre and scattered her ashes and moved on because that's what packs do. They survive. But the bond snapping into place between them said otherwise. It roared through his chest like wildfire, searing and undeniable, and judging by the way her eyes widened, she felt it too. Impossible. He took a step forward, and she flinched. The movement was small, controlled, but he saw it. Saw the way her muscles coiled, ready to fight or flee even though there was nowhere to go. Saw the way her fingers dug into the stone floor, nails broken and bloody from previous attempts to escape. He forced himself to stop, to breathe, to think past the fury threatening to consume him. Who are you? He wanted to ask. What did they do to you? But the words caught in his throat because part of him already knew. Part of him recognized her the way his wolf did, the way his soul did, even though his mind screamed that it was impossible. She opened her mouth as if to speak, and he leaned forward instinctively, desperate to hear her voice. But the collar flared bright, and she gasped, her hand flying to her throat as the magic clamped down, silencing her, punishing her for the attempt. White-hot rage exploded through him. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, dropping to his knees in front of her. She flinched again, but he didn't touch her. Not yet. Instead, he reached for the collar, his fingers hovering just above the cursed thing. Trust me, he wanted to say. But trust had to be earned, especially from someone who'd been locked away and forgotten. So instead, he met her eyes and let her see him. Really see him. The fury, the guilt, the horror at what had been done to her in his name, under his rule, while he'd been blind and ignorant and complicit. And then, slowly, she nodded. He gripped the collar and pulled. The magic fought back, biting into his palms, burning through his skin like acid. He growled through the pain and pulled harder. The runes flared, screaming, and then it broke. The collar shattered, and the backlash of released magic slammed through the room like a shockwave. She collapsed forward, and he caught her, his arms closing around her fragile, trembling body as she gasped and choked and finally breathed freely. Her scent hit him like a punch to the gut. Wild roses and burnt cedar and something ancient he couldn't name. It wrapped around him, through him, claiming him the way the bond had, and he knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't just any woman. This was Celine. His Luna. The one they'd told him was dead. She was shaking in his arms, her breath coming in short, painful bursts as her body remembered what it felt like to exist without chains. He held her carefully, like something precious and breakable, even though he could feel the power radiating off her in waves. Suppressed, yes. Bound and weakened. But still there. Still burning beneath the surface like embers waiting for oxygen. And the pack had done this to her. His pack. The wolves he'd sworn to lead and protect had taken his mate and buried her alive in stone and silence. Why? The question burned through him, but he forced it down. There would be time for answers. Time for justice. Right now, she needed safety. She needed freedom. She needed him to be the mate the bond said he was, even if she didn't remember him. Even if they'd stolen that from her too. He shifted his grip, one arm supporting her back, the other sliding beneath her knees. She tensed, her silver eyes snapping to his face with sudden wariness, but she didn't fight. Maybe she was too weak. Or maybe, despite everything, some part of her recognized him too. He stood, cradling her against his chest, and turned toward the door. The corridor stretched before them, dark and cold and lined with the evidence of her suffering. He'd burn this place to the ground, tear it apart stone by stone until nothing remained but ash and memory. But first, he had to get her out. His wolf prowled beneath his skin, protective and possessive and ready to tear apart anyone who tried to stop them. And judging by the approaching footsteps echoing down the hallway, someone was about to try. The elders appeared in the doorway, their faces pale and drawn. They saw her in his arms, and the color drained from them completely. One of them opened his mouth to speak, but Damien's growl cut him off. It rumbled through the corridor, a sound of dominance and warning that made even the eldest among them step back. He didn't need words. The message was clear. Get out of my way. They did. He carried her through the compound in silence, and the pack scattered before him like leaves before a storm. They stared, whispered. Some looked confused. Others looked terrified. But none of them dared approach. Because the Alpha King was carrying a ghost, and everyone knew that ghosts didn't haunt the living without reason. If you're already hooked, if your heart's already racing, subscribe to Shayla's Romance Library. Because this story is just beginning to burn. Damien took her to his chambers. Not the grand throne room where petitions were heard and judgments passed. Not the infirmary where pack healers would ask questions he wasn't ready to answer. His private quarters. The one place in this entire cursed compound where he knew she'd be safe from prying eyes and scheming hands. The door slammed shut behind them, and he finally allowed himself to breathe. She was still trembling in his arms, her body so light it made his chest ache. How long had they kept her like this? Starving. Bound. Alone in the dark while the rest of them lived and laughed and pretended she'd never existed. He moved toward the bed, intending to set her down gently, but her fingers suddenly twisted in his shirt. Not pulling away. Holding on. As if she was afraid he'd disappear the moment he let go. The gesture broke something in him. He sank onto the edge of the mattress, still cradling her, and let her cling. Her face was pressed against his chest, her breath hot and uneven through the fabric, and he could feel her heartbeat, too fast, too frantic, like a bird trying to escape a cage. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. He couldn't tell anymore. Time felt suspended, caught between the horror of what had been done and the fragile, terrifying hope of what might still be saved. Eventually, her breathing slowed. The trembling eased. And then, for the first time since he'd found her, she spoke. Her voice was raw, broken, like something that had been screaming for so long it forgot how to make gentle sounds. Damien. Just his name. Nothing else. But the way she said it, hesitant and wondering and edged with disbelief, made his wolf surge forward with a possessiveness so fierce it nearly stole his breath. She remembered him. He pulled back just enough to see her face. Those silver eyes were locked on his, searching, questioning, trying to reconcile the man holding her with the memories she'd been forced to bury. You know me, he said. It wasn't a question. Her lips parted, and for a moment he thought she might speak again. But then her gaze dropped to his chest, to where her fingers were still twisted in his shirt, and something like shame flickered across her face. She tried to pull away. He didn't let her. His hand came up to cup her face, tilting her chin until she had no choice but to meet his eyes again. Her skin was cold beneath his palm, and he could feel the rapid flutter of her pulse against his fingertips. Don't, he said quietly. Don't hide from me. She stared at him, and he saw it all written in her expression. The fear. The confusion. The bone-deep exhaustion of someone who'd spent too long fighting just to exist. But beneath all of that, buried so deep he almost missed it, was something else. Recognition. Not just of his face or his name, but of what he was to her. What they were supposed to be. Mates. The word hung between them, unspoken but undeniable. The bond thrummed in his chest, demanding he claim her, protect her, fix everything that had been broken. But he forced himself to stay still, to let her come to him instead of overwhelming her with the intensity of what he felt. She was the one who moved first. Her hand lifted, shaking, and her fingers brushed against his jaw. The touch was feather-light, hesitant, as though she was afraid he might vanish if she pressed too hard. She traced the line of his face, his cheekbone, his temple, the scar that cut through his left eyebrow, and he realized she was memorizing him, relearning him. How long? She whispered. He didn't pretend to misunderstand. 3 years. They told me you were dead 3 years ago. Her hand stilled. Her eyes closed, and he watched something break inside her. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet shattering, like ice cracking beneath weight it was never meant to bear. 3 years. She'd been locked in that room, starving and silenced and forgotten, for 3 years. While he'd mourned a corpse that didn't exist. While he'd burned a pyre for a woman who was still alive, suffering in the dark just a few hundred feet away. The guilt was crushing. He wanted to rage. To destroy. To find every elder who'd conspired in this and make them pay in blood and screams. But she was falling apart in his arms, and his need to comfort her was stronger than his need for vengeance. He pulled her closer, wrapping both arms around her, anchoring her against him as though he could hold her together through sheer force of will. She didn't resist. Instead, she curled into him, her body fitting against his like it had been designed for exactly this purpose. Because it had been. They stayed like that for a long time. Long enough for the fire in the hearth to burn down to embers. Long enough for the storm outside to quiet from a roar to a whisper. And slowly, bit by bit, he felt her begin to relax. The tension in her shoulders eased. Her breathing deepened. The frantic edge of her heartbeat gentled into something almost steady. "Tell me your name," he said softly. She lifted her head, confusion flickering across her face. "You know my name," she said, and there was an edge of something fragile in her voice. Something that sounded like fear. "I do. But I want to hear you say it. I want to hear you claim it." Because names had power. And hers had been taken from her along with everything else. She stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her struggling. Could see the way the suppression had wormed its way into her mind, making her doubt even the most basic truths about herself. But then she took a breath, and when she spoke, her voice was stronger than it had been before. "Celine. My name is Celine." The sound of it, her voice speaking her own name after years of forced silence, hit him like a benediction. Like a prayer answered. "Celine," he repeated, letting the name settle between them. His Luna. His mate. His. She flinched at the possessiveness in his tone, and he forced himself to gentle. This wasn't about what he wanted or what the bond demanded. This was about her. About giving her back the agency that had been stolen. "Why?" she asked suddenly. "Why did they do this to me?" The question he'd been dreading. Because he didn't have an answer. Not yet. But he owed her honesty. "I don't know. But I'm going to find out." She searched his face, looking for the lie, and he let her see the truth of his promise. He would find out. He would uncover every secret, expose every conspirator, and burn down anyone who'd had a hand in this. And then she asked the question that made his blood run cold. What if they had a reason? He stared at her, and she stared back, and he realized what she was really asking. What if I deserved it? The thought was so absurd, so fundamentally wrong, that for a moment he couldn't even form words to refute it. But she wasn't joking. She genuinely believed that she might have done something terrible enough to warrant being erased from existence. "No," he said, and his voice came out harder than he intended. "Whatever they told you, whatever lies they fed you to make you compliant, no. You didn't deserve this. No one deserves this. She looked away, and he could see her retreating back into herself. Back into the dark place where victims convinced themselves they were guilty. He couldn't let that happen. His hand caught her chin again, firmer this time, forcing her to look at him. Listen to me, Celine. You are my Luna. My mate. The bond doesn't lie. It doesn't make mistakes. And it chose you. Which means you are exactly who you were always meant to be. Something flickered in her eyes. Not quite belief, but maybe the beginning of it. The fragile seed of hope trying to take root in scorched earth. I don't remember everything, she whispered. There are gaps. Missing pieces. His jaw tightened. They'd suppressed more than just her wolf. They'd tampered with her memories too. We'll get them back, he promised. All of it. I don't care how long it takes. She studied him for a long moment, and he could see her weighing his words. Deciding whether to trust him. Whether to trust herself. And then, slowly, she nodded. It wasn't acceptance. It wasn't forgiveness or understanding or any of the things he wished he could give her. But it was a start. He shifted, carefully settling her onto the bed and pulling the blankets up around her. She was still too thin, still too pale, but some of the wildness had faded from her eyes. She looked exhausted. Hollowed out. Like someone who'd been running on nothing but survival instinct for so long that rest felt foreign. Sleep, he said. I'll be here when you wake up. She caught his wrist before he could pull away, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so weakened. Where are you going? Nowhere. I'm staying right here. And he meant it. He settled into the chair beside the bed, close enough that she could reach him if she needed to. Close enough that his presence might chase away some of the shadows that still clung to her. She watched him for a moment longer, her silver eyes unreadable in the firelight. And then, finally, she let go. Her eyes drifted closed, and within minutes her breathing had evened out into the deep rhythm of sleep. But Damien didn't sleep. He sat in that chair and watched her, memorizing every detail of her face. The curve of her cheek. The way her lashes cast shadows beneath her eyes. The scars that marked her skin like a map of suffering. And he made a vow. He would find out who did this. He would uncover the truth, no matter how deep he had to dig. And when he did, when he finally had all the answers, there would be a reckoning. She woke to firelight and the scent of cedar. For a moment, Celine didn't remember where she was. Her body tensed, bracing for the cold stone floor, the suffocating dark, the collar biting into her throat. But instead, she found softness. Warmth. The weight of blankets that smelled like pine and something deeper, something that made her wolf stir for the first time in years. Her eyes snapped open. Damien was still there, slouched in the chair beside her bed, his head tipped back against the wall. He wasn't asleep, she could tell by the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed against the armrest, but he'd given her space. Let her rest without hovering. The consideration felt foreign. Wrong, almost. She'd spent so long being watched, monitored, controlled, that kindness felt like a trap waiting to spring. But he'd broken the collar. He'd carried her out of that place. And when she'd said his name, when she'd spoken for the first time in 3 years, he hadn't flinched. Hadn't looked at her like she was broken beyond repair. He'd looked at her like she mattered. The thought made something crack inside her chest, something she'd sealed away so tightly she'd forgotten it existed. Hope. Dangerous, foolish, unbearable hope. She pushed herself upright slowly, testing her body. Everything ached. Her muscles felt atrophied, weak from disuse and starvation. But beneath the pain, she could feel something else stirring. Her wolf. Still bound, still trapped beneath layers of suppression magic, but present. Aware. Alive. Damien's gaze shifted to her immediately, and she realized he'd been tracking her breathing the entire time. Waiting for her to wake. How do you feel? He asked. Like I've been buried alive, she wanted to say. Like I've spent 3 years screaming into silence while the world forgot I existed. But that wasn't what he was asking. He wanted to know if she was okay, if she was stable, if he needed to call healers or dose her with potions or lock her away again for her own protection. The last thought made her throat tighten. "I'm fine," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected. His eyes narrowed. "You're a terrible liar." She almost smiled. Almost. But smiling felt like a betrayal of everything she'd endured, so she looked away instead, focusing on the fire crackling in the hearth. "Tell me what you remember," he said quietly. And there it was. The question she'd been dreading since the moment she woke up in his arms. Because what she remembered was fractured. Incomplete. Like looking at her life through shattered glass, where some pieces reflected truth and others showed only distortion. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself, needing the barrier even though she knew it was useless. He could feel her emotions through the bond. Could probably taste her fear on the air. "I remember you," she said finally. "Us. The mating ceremony." His expression shifted, something raw and painful flickering across his face before he locked it down. "What else?" She closed her eyes, reaching for memories that felt like smoke. There and gone before she could grasp them fully. "I remember the elders. They came to me the night after the ceremony. They said the pack needed an heir. That it was my duty. My purpose." Her fingers twisted in the blanket, knuckles going white. "They had a ritual prepared. Something ancient. They said it would ensure the child would be strong. Powerful. Everything the pack needed to maintain dominance over the territories." She opened her eyes and looked at him, needing to see his reaction. But the ritual required more than just conception. It required binding. Blood magic. They wanted to tie the child's power to the council. Make it a weapon they could control. Damien's entire body went rigid. The air around him seemed to thicken, crackling with barely restrained fury. His eyes flashed gold, his wolf rising to the surface, but he didn't speak. Just waited for her to continue. Celine's throat felt tight, but she forced the words out. "I refused." 2 words. Simple. But they carried the weight of everything that had come after. "I told them no. I said I wouldn't bring a child into the world just to be used as a tool. That our child, yours and mine, deserved to be more than a weapon in someone else's war." Her voice cracked, and she hated herself for it. Hated that even now, after everything, the memory of that night could still break her open. They were furious. They said I was being selfish. Ungrateful. That I didn't understand the responsibilities of being Luna. That the pack's survival depended on this, and I was too weak, too emotional, too human to see the bigger picture. The last word came out bitter. Human. They'd thrown it at her like a curse, as if her compassion made her lesser. As if caring about the life of an unborn child was a flaw to be corrected. "I still refused," she continued, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "So they took the choice away." Damien's hands gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly the wood groaned. She could see his jaw working, could feel the rage pouring off him in waves that made her wolf whimper and press closer to the surface. "They drugged me. Brought me to the ritual chamber. I woke up on an altar with runes carved into my skin and 5 elders chanting in a language I didn't understand." Her hand moved unconsciously to her shoulder, tracing one of the scars hidden beneath her clothes. The memory of the blade cutting into her flesh was so vivid she could almost feel it again. But something went wrong. The magic, it rejected the binding. My wolf fought back even though I was unconscious. The backlash nearly killed 3 of them. She looked up at him, and for the first time since she started speaking, she let him see the full weight of what she carried. "That's when they decided I was too dangerous. Not because I was weak. Because I was too strong. Because my wolf wouldn't submit to their control, and they couldn't risk me producing an heir they couldn't manipulate." Damien's voice came out rough, strained. "What did they do?" Her silver eyes held his, unflinching. "They told you I died. Held a ceremony. Burned something, I don't know what, and made the entire pack mourn a corpse that didn't exist. And then they brought me to the forbidden wing. Put that collar around my throat. Carved suppression runes into my skin. And they left me there. She paused, letting the horror of it settle. They said if I ever tried to shift, the collar would kill me. If I tried to speak through the bond, it would sever permanently. If I fought, if I screamed, if I did anything but sit quietly in the dark, they'd make sure you actually did lose your mate. The silence that followed was suffocating. Damien rose from the chair slowly, his movements controlled, but trembling with suppressed violence. He crossed to the window, his back to her, and she watched his shoulders heave with the effort of breathing through his rage. When he finally spoke, his voice was deadly calm. Names. I need names. She rattled them off without hesitation. Every elder who'd been in that chamber. Every guard who'd stood watch outside her prison. Every healer who'd dosed her food with sedatives to keep her compliant. She'd spent 3 years memorizing their faces, their voices, the particular way each of them looked at her, like she was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be saved. And when she finished, Damien turned to face her, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. He looked destroyed. Gutted. Like someone had reached into his chest and torn out everything vital. I mourned you, he said, and his voice broke on the words. I burned your pyre. I scattered ashes into the wind. I spent 3 years believing you were gone, and the entire time you were. He couldn't finish. Couldn't put words to the atrocity. Celine slid off the bed, her legs unsteady, and crossed to him. She didn't know what she was doing. Didn't know what she could possibly say to ease the guilt and rage warring across his face. But she reached for him anyway, her hand finding his. His fingers closed around hers immediately, desperate and gentle all at once. It wasn't your fault, she said. It was my pack. My rule. My responsibility to protect you. You didn't know. I should have. The words hung between them, heavy with everything unsaid. All the ways they'd both been broken by a conspiracy that had torn them apart before they'd even had a chance to be whole. Her other hand came up to his face, forcing him to look at her. Listen to me, Damien. If you hadn't broken that seal today, I'd still be there. I'd given up. I'd stopped fighting. I thought I'd die in that room, and no one would ever know what happened to me. Her voice strengthened, fed by a fury she hadn't realized she still possessed. But you came. You found me. You broke the collar and carried me out, and you're standing here now, promising me vengeance. So don't you dare waste time on guilt when there are people who actually deserve your rage. Something shifted in his expression. The guilt didn't disappear. She suspected it never would, not completely, but it was joined by something fiercer. More focused. Purpose. He turned his hand in hers, threading their fingers together. Tell me about your wolf, he said. Can you feel her? Celine's breath hitched. She could feel her wolf, yes. But feeling her and accessing her were two different things. The suppression runes carved into her skin still burned with residual magic, keeping her animal locked away. She's there, Celine said. But I can't reach her. The runes. I'll find someone to remove them. Someone I trust. Someone who won't ask questions until I'm ready to provide answers. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust that he could fix what had been broken. But 3 years in the dark had taught her that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. What if they can't be removed? She asked quietly. Then we'll find another way. I don't care if I have to search every territory, consult every ancient text, or bargain with every witch and seer between here and the coast. You will shift again, Celine. You will run free. I swear it. The conviction in his voice nearly undid her. She wanted to believe him. Desperately. But belief required trust, and trust required vulnerability, and vulnerability had nearly destroyed her once already. Still, standing there with his hand wrapped around hers and his eyes blazing with promises she wasn't sure he could keep, she felt something shift inside her. Not acceptance. Not quite. But maybe the willingness to try. There's something else, she said, and her voice dropped lower. Something I haven't told you yet. His thumb traced circles against her palm, patient. Waiting. The ritual they tried to perform, it didn't just fail. It changed something. When my wolf fought back, when the magic shattered, she pulled her hand free and lifted the hem of her shirt just enough to reveal her ribs. There, etched into her skin in silver that seemed to shimmer in the firelight, was a mark. Not a scar from the suppression runes. Something else. Something that pulsed with its own rhythm, matching the beat of her heart. Damien's breath caught. It appeared after the backlash, she said. The elders saw it and lost their minds. They said it was a sign. A prophecy mark. They called it the Luna's flame. His fingers hovered over the mark but didn't touch, as if afraid contact might burn him. Or burn her. What does it mean? She let her shirt fall back into place, wrapping her arms around herself. I don't know. They wouldn't tell me. But whatever it is, it terrified them. One of them said. Her voice faltered, and she had to force the words out. One of them said I wasn't just your Luna. That I was something older. Something the prophecies warned about. The one who would either save the wolf nations or burn them all to ash. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them wanted to examine too closely. Damien was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then he did something she didn't expect. He laughed. Not a happy sound. Not really. More like the bitter acknowledgement of cosmic irony. So they locked you away because you might save us all, he said. Because you were too powerful. Too important. Too much of a threat to their control. He shook his head, dragging a hand through his hair. Gods, Celine. Do you have any idea what we've lost? What I've lost? 3 years we could have spent preparing for whatever's coming. 3 years where you could have been learning to control that power instead of having it suppressed and silenced. His eyes found hers again, and the intensity there made her chest tighten. They didn't just steal you from me. They stole you from yourself. From your destiny. From whatever you were meant to become. The words struck something deep inside her. Something she'd been trying not to think about during those long years in the dark. She'd spent so much time focused on survival that she'd forgotten what it felt like to imagine a future. To believe she could be more than just a ghost haunting her own life. But standing here now, with Damien looking at her like she was something precious and powerful and worth fighting for, maybe she could remember how to hope. I don't know if I can be what they think I am, she admitted. I don't even know if I want to be. All I wanted was to be your mate. To build a life with you. Maybe have a family someday when we were ready. Not because some prophecy demanded it, but because we chose it. Her voice cracked again, and this time she didn't try to hide it. I just wanted to be normal. To be enough as I was. Is that so terrible? Damien closed the distance between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. Not carefully this time. Not like she was fragile. But like she was the only solid thing in a world that had tilted sideways. You're enough, he said fiercely. You've always been enough. Prophecy or no prophecy, mark or no mark, you're my mate. My Luna. And that means something. That means everything. She pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his scent, letting it ground her. His heart was racing beneath her ear, matching the frantic rhythm of her own. I'm scared, she whispered. I'm scared that when we figure out what this mark means, when we uncover whatever prophecy they were talking about, I'm scared I won't be strong enough. That I'll fail. That everyone who called me weak and human and unworthy will be right. His arms tightened around her. Then we'll fail together. And we'll get back up and try again. But you won't face whatever's coming alone, Celine. Not anymore. Never again. She wanted to believe him. But 3 years of isolation had carved doubt so deep into her bones she didn't know how to root it out. As if sensing her hesitation, Damien pulled back just enough to look down at her. You want to know what I think, he said. I think they saw your power and knew they couldn't control it. Couldn't control you. So they convinced themselves you were dangerous. That the prophecy meant destruction instead of salvation. Because it's easier to cage something than to trust it. Easier to silence a voice than to listen to what it's saying. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. But I'm listening now. And whatever you need, time, space, answers, vengeance, I'll help you get it. Because you're not a weapon. You're not a tool. You're not a problem to be solved. He leaned down until his forehead rested against hers. You're my mate. And I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that you are worth finding. Something inside her cracked open. Not breaking, but blooming. Like a seed that had been buried too long finally finding sunlight. She lifted her hands to his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath her palms, and for the first time in 3 years, she let herself feel the bond between them. Really feel it. Not as a chain or a burden or something that could be used against her, but as a connection. A lifeline. A promise that she wasn't alone anymore. And in that moment, pressed against him with his arms around her and his promises settling into her bones, Celine made a decision. She would stop running from what she was. Stop apologizing for the power that had nearly gotten her killed. Stop trying to make herself smaller to fit into boxes other people had built. Because Damien was right. They'd caged her because they were afraid. Because her power threatened their control. Because a Luna who couldn't be manipulated was more dangerous to them than any external enemy. Well, she was done being caged. She pulled back and looked up at him, and when she spoke, her voice was steady. Strong. I want to know the truth. About the prophecy. About this mark. About why they really locked me away. His eyes searched hers, looking for certainty, and whatever he found there made him nod. Then we'll find it. Together. She took a breath, feeling her wolf stir beneath the suppression, feeling the mark on her ribs pulse with heat that felt almost like approval. And when we do, when we uncover all their lies and secrets, her silver eyes blazed. I want them to answer for what they did. Not just to me, but to you. To us. To everything we could have been. Damien's smile was sharp. Predatory. The smile of an alpha who'd just been given permission to hunt. That, my Luna, I can promise you. 3 days passed before Damien let anyone near her. 3 days of rest and healing and slow, careful conversations that stitched together the pieces of who they'd been before everything shattered. 3 days where Celine relearned what it felt like to eat without fear, to sleep without nightmares clawing at her consciousness, to exist in a space where she wasn't constantly bracing for punishment. But on the 4th day, Damien came to her with news. I found someone, he said. Someone who can read the mark. Who might know what the elders were so afraid of. Celine looked up from where she'd been sitting by the window, watching the territory stretch out below. She'd been stronger each day, her body slowly remembering what it felt like to be fed and rested. But the suppression runes still burned beneath her skin, and her wolf remained locked away, a constant ache she couldn't ignore. Who? She asked. An oracle. She lives in the sacred grove 3 miles north of here. The pack doesn't visit her often, most of them are too afraid of what she might see. He moved to stand beside her, his shoulder brushing hers in a gesture that had become familiar over the past few days. Comforting. She's old, he continued. Older than any wolf I've ever met. Some say she was alive when the first packs formed. When the moon itself chose our ancestors and gave them the gift of the shift. Celine's pulse quickened. She'd heard stories of the ancient oracles, the seers who existed outside pack politics and territorial disputes, who spoke for the old gods and interpreted the will of forces most wolves had forgotten existed. Will she help us? She asked. Damien's expression was complicated. She'll help you. Whether that means giving us answers we want to hear is another question entirely. Celine turned to face him fully. I need to know, Damien. I need to understand what this mark means. What I'm supposed to be. Because right now, I feel like I'm walking around with a loaded weapon carved into my skin, and I have no idea how to control it or what it's meant to do. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Then we go tonight. Under cover of darkness. I don't want the elders knowing where we're headed until we have answers. Relief and anxiety warred in her chest, but she pushed both aside. Tonight, she agreed. The sacred grove was exactly what its name promised. Ancient trees towered overhead, their branches woven so thick that moonlight barely penetrated the canopy. The air hummed with magic, old magic, the kind that predated pack structures and territorial laws. The kind that remembered when wolves were wild things, answerable only to the moon and their own instincts. Celine felt it the moment they crossed into the grove. Her wolf stirred beneath the suppression, restless and yearning, as if recognizing something fundamental. Something that called to the deepest parts of her nature. Damien's hand found hers, steadying her as they walked deeper into the trees. Neither of them spoke. The grove demanded silence, reverence. To speak carelessly here would be to insult forces far older and more powerful than any Alpha King. The path opened into a clearing, and there, at its center, stood a structure that looked like it had grown rather than been built. Massive roots twisted upward to form walls and a roof, creating a dwelling that was more living tree than house. Pale light emanated from within, soft and silver like captured moonlight. A figure emerged from the doorway. She was small, hunched with age, her hair silver white and hanging in braids adorned with bones and feathers and stones that glowed faintly in the darkness. Her eyes were milky white, blind, but when she turned toward them, Celine had the distinct impression those eyes saw far more than physical sight ever could. "Alpha King," the oracle said, her voice like wind through autumn leaves. "You bring me something precious. Something lost." Her unseeing gaze fixed on Celine, and despite the lack of pupils, Celine felt utterly exposed. As if those blind eyes could see straight through flesh and bone to the core of her soul. "Come, child. Let me see what they tried to hide." Celine glanced at Damien, who nodded encouragingly. She stepped forward, her legs unsteady, and approached the oracle. The old woman reached out with gnarled hands and touched Celine's face. Her fingers were cold, but not unpleasantly so. They traced the line of Celine's jaw, her cheekbones, her temples, as if reading something written in her features. Then her hands moved lower, finding the mark through Celine's clothes as easily as if it were exposed. The moment her fingers made contact, the mark flared to life. Silver light burst from Celine's ribs, so bright it illuminated the entire clearing. She gasped, stumbling back, but the oracle held firm, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so ancient. "Yes," the oracle breathed. "There you are." The light intensified, and suddenly Celine wasn't in the grove anymore. She was standing in a vast hall carved from white stone. Torches burned with silver flames along the walls, and at the far end stood a throne made of moonlight itself. And on that throne, a woman. Impossibly beautiful. Impossibly powerful. Her eyes were molten silver, and when she looked at Celine, the weight of her attention nearly drove Celine to her knees. The moon herself. The goddess spoke, and her voice was every hell Celine had ever heard, every song sung to the night sky, every prayer whispered in darkness. "Daughter of my blood. Keeper of my flame. You were hidden because they feared what you would become." Celine tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't work. She could only listen. "Long ago, when I first blessed your kind with the gift of the shift, I made a promise. That one day, when the wolf nations stood on the edge of extinction, I would send one who carried my essence. One who could unite the packs or end them entirely. One who would have the power to remake the world or watch it burn." The goddess rose from her throne, descending the steps until she stood directly before Celine. "You're that one, child. The Luna Eternal. The flame that cannot be extinguished. The wolf who will either save your kind or judge them unworthy of salvation." Terror and awe crashed through Celine in equal measure. "I don't understand," she managed to whisper. "Why me? I'm not special. I'm just... You are my daughter in the truest sense. Born under a blood moon. marked by silver fire. You carry within you a fragment of my own power, passed down through bloodlines so ancient most have forgotten they ever existed. The goddess's hand came up to rest over Celine's heart. Your wolf is not like others. She is not merely beast. She is divine. And when you finally claim her fully, when the suppression is broken and you shift for the first time. She leaned close, her breath cool against Celine's ear. The world will know fear. And hope. In equal measure. The vision shattered. Celine found herself back in the grove, on her knees in the dirt, gasping for air. Damien was beside her instantly, his arms around her, his voice in her ear asking if she was okay. She couldn't answer. Couldn't process what she'd just seen. The oracle stood over them both, her blind eyes somehow knowing. She has seen it now, the old woman said. The truth they tried to bury. The destiny they tried to deny. Damien's voice was strained. What did she see? The oracle smiled, and it was not entirely kind. She saw what she is, Alpha King. And now she must decide what she will become. Celine finally found her voice, though it came out shaking. The moon herself. I saw the goddess. She said. She said you're the Luna Eternal, the oracle finished. The one foretold in prophecies so old most dismiss them as myth. The one who will rise when the packs have fallen to corruption and greed. Who will judge them worthy or wanting. The old woman's expression gentled slightly. The elders knew, child. Not all of it, perhaps. But enough. Enough to understand that you could not be controlled. That your power would eclipse theirs. That if you ever truly awakened, their reign would end. Anger flared hot in Celine's chest. So they locked me away. Suppressed me. Tried to make sure I'd never become what I was meant to be. The oracle nodded. They chose their own power over the survival of your kind. And in doing so, they set in motion the very destruction they feared. Damien's arms tightened around Celine. What destruction? The oracle's blind gaze turned toward him. The territories are dying, Alpha King. Surely you felt it. The borders failing. Wolves unable to shift. The land itself rejecting your kind. It's because the balance has been broken. Because the Luna Eternal was bound when she should have been free. Because destiny itself has been thwarted. She gestured toward Celine. Every day she remains suppressed, the corruption spreads. Every day her wolf is caged, your kind inches closer to extinction. The goddess does not take kindly to her chosen being imprisoned. Celine's mind reeled. All those power shifts Damien had felt. The instability in the territory. The wolves collapsing mid-shift. It was because of her. Because of what they'd done to her. How do we fix it? Damien demanded. How do we break the suppression? The oracle was quiet for a long moment. There is only one way. She must return to the place where she was bound. To the ritual chamber where they tried to steal her power. There, with the Alpha King at her side, she must reclaim what was taken. She paused, and her expression grew grave. But know this, when the suppression breaks, when her true nature is revealed, there will be no going back. She will transform, yes, but so will everything around her. The pack will either kneel or burn. The elders will either surrender or die. And you, Alpha King. Her blind eyes found Damien with unsettling accuracy. You will have to choose whether to stand beside a mate who could destroy everything you've built, or protect a pack that betrayed you both. The words hung in the air like a pronouncement of doom. Celine looked up at Damien, searching his face for doubt, for fear, for any sign that this was too much. That she was too much. But all she saw was determination. His hand found her face, tilting it up so she had no choice but to hold his gaze. I already chose, he said quietly. The moment I broke that seal. The moment I saw what they did to you. I chose you, Celine. And I'll choose you every time. Something fierce and bright bloomed in her chest. Not quite love, they'd been torn apart too early for that, and 3 years of suffering couldn't be erased in 3 days of comfort. But something that could become love. Something that already felt like home. She turned back to the oracle. When? She asked. When do we do this? The oracle smiled, and this time it was approving. The blood moon rises in 2 nights. That is when the veil between divine and mortal is thinnest. That is when you will have the strength to break what was done to you. 2 nights. Celine's wolf howled beneath the suppression, sensing freedom on the horizon. Sensing destiny. And for the first time since she'd been locked away, Celine felt something other than fear or despair. She felt ready. They should have known the elders would find out. Damien had been careful. He'd moved in darkness, kept Celine hidden, told no one where they were going or what they'd learned. But secrets in a pack were like blood in water, impossible to hide once they started spreading. The summons came the morning after their visit to the oracle. A formal request from the council for the Alpha King's presence at an emergency session. Mandatory attendance. Immediate response required. Damien stared at the sealed letter, his jaw tight. They know, he said. Celine stood by the window, watching the compound come alive with morning activity. Wolves moving between buildings, going about their daily routines, completely unaware that everything they knew was about to shatter. How? She asked. He crushed the letter in his fist. Someone must have seen us leave. Or the oracle has spies I didn't know about. Or maybe they've just been waiting for me to make a move ever since I broke that seal. He turned to face her, and she could see the conflict written across his features. They're going to demand answers. They're going to want to know what I found in the Forbidden Wing. What I intend to do with you. With me, she repeated quietly. Like I'm a problem to be solved. You know what I mean. She did. But that didn't make it hurt less. So what do we do? She asked. Damien crossed to her, taking her hands in his. I have to attend. If I don't, they'll see it as a challenge. They'll have the excuse they need to move against me. Against us. Fear spiked through her. They'll try to take me back. Over my dead body. The vehemence in his voice should have been comforting. But Celine had learned the hard way that good intentions didn't always translate to protection. Take me with you, she said suddenly. His eyes widened. Celine. No. Listen. If they're going to discuss my fate, I deserve to be there. I deserve to face them. To make them look at what they did to me. She stepped closer, urgent. You said I wasn't alone anymore. That we'd face whatever came together. So let me face this. Let me stand in that chamber and show them I'm still here. Still alive. Still stronger than whatever they tried to turn me into. Damien studied her face, and she could see him weighing the risks. The danger of bringing her into a room full of wolves who'd orchestrated her imprisonment. Who saw her as a threat to be neutralized rather than a person to be protected. But she also saw the moment he decided to trust her. All right, he said. But you stay by my side. You don't engage unless I give you permission. And if things go wrong, I run, she finished. I know. No. If things go wrong, you let me handle it. Because I am still the Alpha King, and they will bow to my authority or they'll face the consequences. The words should have sounded arrogant. Instead, they sounded like a promise. The council chamber was exactly as oppressive as Celine remembered. High ceilings carved with ancient pack symbols. Stone walls that seemed to absorb sound. And at the center, a circular table where the 5 elders sat like judges presiding over a trial. They looked up as Damien entered, and Celine watched their faces shift from expectation to shock to barely concealed fury when they saw her walking beside him. What is the meaning of this? The head elder, Garrick, demanded. His voice was thin and reedy, but it carried the weight of decades of unchallenged authority. Damien's hand rested on the small of Celine's back, steady and grounding. You summoned me for a discussion about the Forbidden Wing. I brought the only person who can provide testimony about what occurred there. Garrick's face went pale. This is highly irregular. The council chamber is no place for my Luna, Damien interrupted, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Or were you about to say something else? Something that might suggest she doesn't belong in pack discussions despite being the rightful mate of your Alpha King. The other elders exchanged glances. Celine recognized them all. Theron, who'd held her down during the attempted ritual. Stellan, who'd carved the first suppression rune into her shoulder. Kaelin, who'd fitted the collar around her throat. And Valen, who'd brought her food once a week, just enough to keep her alive, but never enough to give her strength. Looking at them now, free and standing in the light, she felt her wolf surge against the suppression. Rage and recognition twisting together. She sat there and said, his voice flat. She was deemed unfit. The matter was settled. By whom? Damien asked. By what authority? I certainly didn't sign any decree declaring my mate unfit. I didn't approve her imprisonment. I wasn't even consulted. You were grieving, Garrick said smoothly. We made the difficult decisions so you wouldn't have to bear that burden. Celine's hands clenched beneath the table. Liar, she said quietly. Every head turned toward her. Garrick's expression hardened. You will not speak in these proceedings. I'll speak wherever I damn well please, Celine said, her voice stronger now. You stole 3 years of my life. You locked me in the dark and tried to make me disappear. The least you can do is hear what I have to say. She stood, and Damien rose with her, a united front. You tried to force me into a ritual that would have weaponized my child. When I refused, you attempted it anyway. And when the magic rejected your binding, when my wolf fought back and nearly killed you. She leaned forward, her silver eyes blazing. You decided I was too dangerous to exist. Not because I was weak. Because I was powerful. Because you couldn't control me. The ritual was for the good of the pack, Stellan interjected. You were too short-sighted to understand the necessity. The necessity of enslaving an unborn child, Celine shot back. Of turning my body into a breeding ground for your weapon. Of violating every natural law about consent and autonomy because you were too afraid to trust that maybe, just maybe, a Luna could be strong without being controlled. Silence crashed through the chamber. Kaelin cleared his throat. You speak of things you don't understand. The prophecies. I've seen the prophecies, Celine said. I spoke with the oracle. I know exactly what you were afraid of. She pulled up her shirt, revealing the mark. It glowed faintly in the chamber's dim light, pulsing with silver fire. The Luna Eternal. The one who would rise to judge the packs. That's what this is, isn't it? That's why you locked me away. Because you knew that if I ever came into my power, your corruption would be exposed. Your crimes would be answered. The elders' faces had gone ashen. Garrick stood abruptly. This council will not be threatened by a female who doesn't understand her place. Enough. Damien's voice cracked through the chamber like thunder. The entire room seemed to vibrate with the force of his authority. His eyes had gone full gold, his wolf pressing close to the surface. You will not speak to her that way. You will not diminish her. And you will sure as hell not pretend that what you did was anything other than betrayal of the highest order. He stepped forward, and even the elders, powerful in their own right, shrank back. You lied to your alpha. You imprisoned his mate. You conspired to steal her power and silence her voice. And now you sit here, in this chamber built on oaths of loyalty and service, and you have the audacity to act like you were in the right. His hands slammed down on the table. I want names. I want every person who knew she was alive. Every guard who stood watch. Every healer who dosed her food. Everyone who participated in this conspiracy. The elders remained silent. Damien's growl filled the space. Speak. Now. Before anyone could respond, the doors to the chamber burst open. A young wolf stumbled in, his face pale with terror. Alpha King, he gasped. The borders, they're collapsing. The entire Northern Territory is going dark. Wolves are shifting involuntarily and can't change back. The land itself is. He stopped, seeing Celine. His eyes widened in recognition and horror. You, he breathed. You're the one from the stories. The ghost Luna. You're supposed to be dead. I was never dead, Celine said quietly. Just buried alive. The young wolf backed toward the door. The pack needs to know. They need to know she's here. That the Alpha King is harboring. What, Damien snapped. Harboring his own mate. His Luna. The woman you all mourned and then forgot. But the damage was done. The young wolf fled, and Celine knew with sickening certainty that within minutes, the entire pack would know. Would be gathering. Would be demanding answers. Garrick's smile was cold. It seems the decision has been made for us, Alpha King. The pack will never accept her. Not after the lies we've told. Not after they've already grieved her once. He stood slowly. The only way to maintain order is to finish what we started. Return her to the Forbidden Wing. Or better yet, he didn't finish, but Celine heard the unspoken words. Kill her. Make her truly dead this time. Damien moved faster than thought. One moment he was standing beside Celine. The next, he had Garrick slammed against the wall, his hand around the elder's throat. If you think I will let you touch her, he snarled. If you think for 1 second that I won't burn this entire pack to the ground to keep her safe. Alpha King. Theron's voice, carefully neutral. The pack is gathering outside. If you kill an elder in this chamber, you'll start a civil war. Is that truly what you want? Damien's chest heaved. His wolf was screaming to rip Garrick's throat out. To eliminate the threat. To protect his mate at any cost. But Theron was right. If he killed Garrick now, the pack would fracture. Some would support him. Others would see it as tyranny. And in the chaos, Celine would be vulnerable. He released Garrick, who crumpled to the floor gasping. This isn't over, Damien said. Not even close. He turned to Celine, taking her hand. We're leaving. They made it 3 steps toward the door before it opened again. This time, it wasn't a single wolf. It was dozens. Pack members crowding into the chamber, their faces a mixture of confusion, anger, and fear. And at the front of the crowd stood a figure Celine had hoped never to see again. Ronan. One of the pack's strongest warriors. One of the wolves who'd supported the elder's decision to imprison her. His eyes locked on her, and his expression twisted with rage. Abomination, he spat. You should have stayed buried. Celine felt Damien tense beside her, felt his wolf rising to defend her. But before either of them could move, Ronan shifted. His bones cracked and reformed, his body exploding into a massive black wolf that snarled and lunged. Not at Damien. At her. Damien's wolf met Ronan mid-leap. The impact shook the chamber. 2 massive bodies colliding with the force of thunder, teeth and claws and fury. Celine stumbled back, her heart hammering, as the Alpha King fought to protect her from a wolf who'd once sworn loyalty to them both. The other pack members scattered, pressing against the walls, uncertain whether to intervene or flee. The elders remained at their table, watching with expressions that bordered on satisfaction. They wanted this. Wanted the pack to see her as a threat. Wanted Damien forced to choose between his mate and his people. Damien's wolf was larger, more powerful, but Ronan fought with the desperation of someone who believed he was protecting his pack from a monster. Their snarls filled the chamber, echoing off stone walls that had witnessed countless challenges, but never one like this. Never an alpha defending his supposedly dead mate from his own warriors. Celine's hands shook. Her wolf was screaming beneath the suppression, demanding to be released, demanding to fight. But the runes burned hot against her skin, keeping her trapped in human form. Helpless. Just like they'd intended. Damien's jaws closed around Ronan's throat, not to kill, but to dominate. To force submission. But Ronan twisted free, his claws raking across Damien's shoulder, drawing blood. The scent of it hit the air, and something inside Celine snapped. Enough. Her voice rang out, cold and commanding, carrying a weight that shouldn't have been possible for someone suppressed and weakened. But it was enough. Both wolves froze. Turned toward her. And Celine saw something flicker in their eyes, recognition of an authority that transcended pack hierarchy. Something older. Something divine. The mark on her ribs blazed to life, silver light bleeding through her clothes, and suddenly the entire chamber was bathed in moonlight that had no earthly source. Ronan shifted back to human form involuntarily, collapsing to his knees. Damien remained wolf but lowered his head, his golden eyes fixed on her with something like awe. She hadn't meant to do it. Hadn't known she could. But the power that had been locked away for 3 years was fighting its way to the surface, responding to her desperation, her fury, her absolute refusal to be a victim anymore. "I said enough," she repeated, and her voice echoed strangely, as though multiple voices spoke through her at once. She looked at Ronan, at the fear and confusion written across his face. "You call me an abomination. You attack me without knowing what was done to me, without asking why I was hidden away, without questioning the lies you were told." Her silver eyes swept the chamber, finding every pack member who'd crowded in to watch. "They told you I was weak. That I died because I couldn't handle being Luna. That I was too human, too fragile, too unworthy." She lifted her shirt higher, letting them all see the mark, the suppression runes, the scars of ritual torture. "This is what they did when I refused to let them weaponize my child. This is what they did when my power proved too strong for them to control. They locked me away, starved me, silenced me. And then they held a funeral and made you all mourn a corpse that didn't exist." Silence. Heavy and suffocating. "So, before you decide I'm the monster in this story," Celine said quietly, "maybe ask yourselves who the real abomination is. The woman who refused to let her child be enslaved. Or the elders who imprisoned her for it." The light from her mark began to fade, and with it, whatever supernatural authority had gripped the room. Celine swayed, suddenly exhausted, and Damien was there instantly, shifted back to human, catching her before she could fall. "We're done here," he said, his voice rough. "This council is dismissed until I decide otherwise." No one moved to stop them as he lifted Celine into his arms and carried her from the chamber. But she could feel their eyes following her, could feel the weight of their confusion, their fear, their uncertain loyalty. The pack had seen her now. There was no going back. Damien took her somewhere she'd never been before. A cabin on the outskirts of the territory, hidden among ancient pines and far enough from the compound that they could breathe without feeling the weight of 100 watching eyes. He set her down gently on a worn couch in front of a stone fireplace, then immediately set about building a fire. She watched him work in silence, noting the tension in his shoulders, the careful control in his movements. He was holding himself together by threads. When the fire was crackling and warmth began to fill the small space, he finally turned to face her. "You shouldn't have done that," he said. "Used whatever power you have. Not when you're still suppressed. Not when we don't know what it could do to you." Celine looked at him steadily. "He was going to kill you. I could have handled it. By ripping out the throat of one of your own warriors. In front of half the pack. That would have gone well." Damien dragged a hand through his hair, frustrated. "That's not the point. The point is you put yourself at risk. You used power you can't control. What if it had backfired? What if the suppression had punished you for it?" She stood, ignoring her shaking legs, and crossed to him. "But it didn't. And I'm still here. And now the pack knows I'm not some helpless victim they can dismiss." She reached up, cupping his face, feeling the tension thrumming through him. "I'm not fragile, Damien. I never was. They just convinced everyone, including you, that I needed to be protected rather than trusted." His hands came up to cover hers, and she felt him trembling. "I can't lose you again," he said, and his voice cracked on the words. "I can't. These past 3 years, grieving you, blaming myself for not protecting you, it nearly destroyed me. And now that I have you back, the thought of anything happening to you." He stopped, unable to continue. Celine's heart clenched. She'd been so focused on her own pain, her own suffering, that she hadn't fully considered what her disappearance had done to him. The guilt he'd carried. The grief that had no outlet because the pack demanded strength from their alpha even in mourning. "I'm sorry," she whispered. His eyes snapped to hers. "Don't you dare apologize. None of this was your fault. I know. But I'm still sorry you had to go through that. That they made you mourn me while I was suffering just out of reach. She stepped closer until there was no space between them. But I'm here now. I'm alive. I'm fighting. And I need you to trust that I can handle whatever comes. Damien's forehead dropped to rest against hers. I do trust you. He exhaled shakily. I don't trust the world not to take you from me again. Then don't let it, she said simply. Stand with me. Fight with me. Stop trying to shield me from everything and let me be the partner I'm supposed to be. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her flush against him, and she felt the last of his control fracture. He held her like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth, and maybe she was. I'm terrified, he admitted against her hair. Terrified of what's coming. Of what the pack will do when they fully understand what you are. Of what the elders will try next. Of what will happen when we break the suppression and your full power emerges. She pulled back just enough to look at him. Me too. But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe and alone in the dark. Something shifted in his expression. The fear didn't disappear, but it was joined by determination. By resolve. He lifted one hand to trace the line of her jaw, his touch achingly gentle. When this is over, he said quietly, when we've broken the suppression and dealt with the elders and stabilized the pack, I want to do this right. I want to court you properly. To give you the mating ceremony you deserved. To build the life we should have had from the beginning. Celine's breath caught. You want that? Even knowing what I am. What I might become. Especially knowing that, he said. Because you're not just the Luna Eternal or the vessel for some prophecy. You're Celine. You're clever and stubborn and braver than anyone I've ever met. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving that you were worth finding. Worth fighting for. Worth everything. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. Ask me after, she said. After we've survived what's coming. After I know I can be the mate you need without destroying everything you've built. He smiled, soft and sad. You already are the mate I need. But I'll wait. I'll give you whatever time you need to believe it too. They stood there in the firelight, holding each other, and for a brief moment the world outside ceased to exist. There was no prophecy. No vengeful elders. No pact torn between loyalty and fear. There was just them. Eventually, Damien guided her back to the couch and sat beside her, keeping her tucked against his side. The fire crackled and popped, filling the silence with comfortable sound. Tell me something, Celine said after a while. Something about you I don't know. Something that has nothing to do with being alpha or the pack or any of this. He was quiet for a moment, thinking. I wanted to be a healer, he said finally. She blinked, surprised. A healer? Really? He nodded, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Before I was old enough to understand what being alpha meant. Before I knew I'd inherit the territory. I used to follow the pack healers around, learning about herbs and poultices and how to set bones. I thought it was the most important job in the world, fixing what was broken. His expression turned distant. And then my father died. And suddenly I was alpha. And fixing broken things became a lot more complicated than setting bones and brewing tea. Celine reached for his hand, threading their fingers together. Maybe that's why you're good at it, she said. At leading. Because you still see your people as things to be healed rather than just ruled. He looked at her, and something in his eyes softened. Maybe. Or maybe I just got lucky that my mate is someone who reminds me what's worth fighting for. The words settled between them, warm and true. Tell me something about you, he said. Something I don't know. She thought for a long moment. I used to sing, she said finally. Before everything happened. When I was alone or thought no one could hear. Nothing formal, just songs. Old songs my grandmother taught me. Songs about the moon and the wild places and wolves who were free. Have you sung since? No. The caller wouldn't let me. And after a while, I forgot how. Forgot what my own voice sounded like beyond screaming or crying. She looked at him. But maybe someday. When my throat remembers how to make sounds that aren't born from pain. Damien's hand tightened around hers. I want to hear you sing, he said. When you're ready. When your voice is yours again. She leaned her head against his shoulder, exhausted but oddly peaceful. They stayed like that through the night, trading stories and silences, building something fragile and precious between them. Not the bond that had always been there, whether they wanted it or not. But something simpler. Something human. Trust. And when dawn broke and they knew they'd have to return to face the pack, face the elders, face whatever came next, they did it together. The blood moon rose in a sky thick with storm clouds. Celine stood at the window of Damien's chambers, watching the crimson light spill across the territory. Somewhere out there, the pack was gathering. Some in support, some in opposition, most simply confused and afraid. The young wolf who'd fled the council chamber had done his job well. Within hours, everyone knew the ghost Luna had returned. And opinions were split like a blade through bone. Tomorrow night, Damien said from behind her. The oracle said the blood moon would give you strength. Tomorrow night, we go to the ritual chamber and break the suppression. Celine nodded, not turning from the window. They'd spent the day preparing, gathering what little information existed about suppression magic and how to undo it. Consulting with a few wolves, Damien still trusted his beta, Kieran, and a handful of warriors who'd remained loyal despite the elders' whisper campaigns. But preparation couldn't stop the dread pooling in her stomach. Something's wrong, she said quietly. Damien crossed to her, his warmth a steadying presence at her back. What do you mean? I don't know. I feel like we're missing something. Like there's a piece of this we haven't seen yet. Before he could respond, the door burst open. Kieran stood in the doorway, his face pale, holding a leather-bound journal. We have a problem, he said. Damien tensed immediately. What kind of problem? Kieran stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He held up the journal. I found this in Garrick's private quarters. I know I shouldn't have been snooping, but after everything that's happened, I wanted leverage. Evidence we could use against them. He opened the journal, his hands shaking slightly. But what I found, it's worse than we thought. Celine turned from the window, dread coiling tighter. Show us, Damien said. Kieran laid the journal on the table, flipping to a marked page. The handwriting was spidery and precise, unmistakably Garrick's. Damien leaned over it, and Celine watched his expression shift from confusion to horror. No, he breathed. Celine moved closer, reading over his shoulder. The entry was dated 4 years ago. Before the mating ceremony. Before everything fell apart. The prophecy is clear, Garrick had written. The Luna Eternal will rise when the Alpha King takes his true mate. Her power will eclipse all others, and she will judge the packs worthy or unworthy of survival. We cannot allow this. If she awakens, our authority will mean nothing. The old ways, the structure we've built over centuries, will crumble. Therefore, we must ensure she never fully awakens. The mating cannot be allowed to complete. The bond must be corrupted before it can strengthen her. Celine's blood ran cold. Keep reading, Kieran said grimly. Damien's voice was hollow as he read the next passage aloud. The boy has already chosen her. His wolf recognizes its mate. We cannot stop the ceremony without raising suspicion. But we can sabotage what comes after. If we can drive them apart before the bond fully forms, before they consummate the mating, her power will remain dormant. Incomplete. He stopped, his hands gripping the edges of the table. Gods. What? Celine asked, though part of her already knew. Damien looked at her, and the devastation in his eyes nearly broke her. They didn't lock you away because you refused the ritual. That was just the excuse. They locked you away to prevent the bond from completing. To keep your power suppressed permanently. The words landed like blows. Their mating ceremony had happened 3 years ago. They'd been bonded, but hadn't had time to consummate it before the elders had taken her. Before she'd been imprisoned. Which meant the bond was incomplete. Weakened. exactly as the elders had intended. There's more, Kieran said quietly. He flipped ahead several pages to an entry dated just weeks ago. The Alpha King grows suspicious. He's felt the power shifts in the territory. Soon he'll trace them to the source. If he finds her, if he breaks the seal, we'll lose control of the situation. But there may still be a way to salvage this. The suppression has weakened her, yes. But it's also kept the bond from fully forming. If we can drive a wedge between them, make him doubt her, make her doubt him, the prophecy can still be averted. The key is the child. She refused to bear one under our control. But if we can convince the Alpha King that she cannot bear his heir, that the suppression has left her barren, he will have no choice but to take another mate, to set her aside for the good of the pack. And once the bond is severed, once he chooses another, her power will burn out. The Luna Eternal will never rise. And our authority will remain intact. Silence crashed through the room. Celine felt like she'd been gutted. They hadn't just stolen her freedom. They'd tried to destroy her bond, her future, her very purpose. And they'd planned to make Damien complicit in it. They were going to make you reject me, she said numbly. Damien's fists slammed down on the table, making the journal jump. I would never choose. But they would have made it look reasonable, Kieran said. Made it look like duty. Like the responsible choice for an alpha who needed an heir. He closed the journal. There's more. Plans for how to approach you. Arguments they were going to make. Ways to isolate her and make her believe you'd moved on. It's all here. Every manipulation. Every lie. Celine wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire burning in the hearth. So what now, she asked. We know what they planned. We know why they did it. But that doesn't change the fact that the bond is incomplete. That my power is still suppressed. That we break the suppression tomorrow as planned, Damien said. We complete the bond. We give them exactly what they tried to prevent. He turned to Kieran. Double the guard on the ritual chamber. I don't want anyone near it except people we absolutely trust. And keep this journal hidden. If the elders know we found it, they'll accelerate whatever backup plan they have, Kieran finished. I know. He headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Alpha, I'm with you. Whatever happens tomorrow. Whatever the pack decides. You have my loyalty. Damien nodded and Kieran left, closing the door softly behind him. Celine stared at the journal, at the evidence of how thoroughly she'd been betrayed. How carefully they'd orchestrated every moment of her suffering. Part of her wanted to rage. To storm down to the council chamber and force them to answer for every word they'd written. But a larger part of her just felt hollow. Exhausted by the weight of it all. Celine. Damien's voice was gentle. She looked up and found him watching her with an expression that was equal parts fury and heartbreak. I'm sorry, he said. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. Didn't question their story. Didn't fight harder to find the truth. You couldn't have known, she said. I should have felt it. Should have felt that you were alive through the bond. The suppression blocked it. That's what it was designed to do. He crossed to her, cupping her face in his hands. Tomorrow, we end this. We break the suppression. We complete the bond. And then we deal with the elders, she finished. We make them answer for everything. His eyes searched hers. Are you sure you're ready for this? For what it might mean. For what you might become. She thought about the mark burning beneath her skin. About the goddess's words in her vision. About 3 years spent in the dark, believing she deserved it. And then she thought about Damien standing beside her in the council chamber. About him breaking the collar. About him choosing her over and over, despite everything. I'm ready, she said. I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of letting them control my story. Her hands covered his. Tomorrow, I reclaim everything they tried to take. My wolf. My power. My mate. My future. Something fierce and proud blazed in his eyes. Tomorrow, he agreed. They stood there in the crimson light of the blood moon, holding each other, preparing for what would either be their salvation or their destruction. Neither of them slept that night. Dawn came too quickly. Selene dressed in simple clothes, practical, easy to remove when the time came to shift. If she could shift. If her wolf survived the suppression being lifted. There were so many unknowns. So many ways this could go wrong. But there was no other choice. The territory was dying. The pack was fracturing. And she was the key to stopping it, or the catalyst that would burn it all down. Damien appeared in the doorway, already dressed, his expression grim. "It's time," he said. She took a breath and followed him out. They made their way through the compound in silence. Wolves stopped and stared as they passed, whispers following in their wake. Some faces showed support. Others showed fear or anger or uncertainty. But they kept walking. The ritual chamber was in the deepest part of the compound, accessible only through a series of descending corridors that grew darker and colder with each step. Kieran and a handful of trusted warriors stood guard at the entrance. The chamber was ready. Damien had made sure of it. Torches burned along the walls, casting dancing shadows across the stone floor. And at the center, the altar where they'd tried to bind her power 3 years ago. Selene's hands shook as she looked at it. "You don't have to do this here," Damien said quietly. "We can find another place." "No. This is where they tried to break me. This is where I reclaim what they stole." She stepped into the chamber and immediately felt the weight of old magic pressing down on her. This place had witnessed countless rituals, countless bonds forged and powers awakened. And one terrible betrayal. Damien closed the door behind them, sealing them inside. "How do we do this?" she asked. "The oracle said the suppression has to be broken from the inside and the outside simultaneously. I'll work on removing the physical runes. You'll have to reach for your wolf. Call to her. Pull her to the surface despite the magic trying to keep her buried. And if it doesn't work..." His jaw tightened. "It will work." But she heard what he didn't say. If it didn't work, the backlash could kill her. Could burn her out from the inside. Could leave her truly broken in ways even the suppression hadn't managed. She moved to the altar and sat on its edge, her heart hammering. Damien knelt before her, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Two people who'd been torn apart before they'd had a chance to be whole. Two mates trying to salvage something beautiful from the wreckage of betrayal. "I love you," he said suddenly. Her breath caught. "I know I haven't said it. I know we haven't had time. But I need you to know. Whatever happens in the next few minutes, I love you, Selene. I've loved you since the moment I first saw you. And I'll love you long after this world ends." Tears burned her eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. And then, before either of them could lose their nerve, he began. His hands moved to her shoulders, finding the first suppression rune carved into her skin. He pressed his palm against it, and she felt his power surge, the dominant, overwhelming force of an alpha king pushing against magic that had held for 3 years. The rune flared hot, and pain exploded through her. She bit back a scream, gripping the edge of the altar. Inside her, she felt her wolf stirring, sensing freedom, pushing against the cage. "Keep going," she gasped. Damien moved to the next rune. And the next. Each one burned as his power worked to dissolve the spells carved into her flesh. And with each rune that broke, she felt her wolf surge closer to the surface. "Almost there," Damien said, his voice strained. "One more rune. The largest one. The one carved directly over her heart." He placed both hands over it and poured everything he had into breaking it. The magic screamed. Selene screamed. And somewhere deep inside her, her wolf howled in triumph as the final barrier shattered. The door to the ritual chamber exploded inward. Garrick stood in the doorway, flanked by a dozen warriors, his face twisted with fury. "Stop them," he commanded. And the world erupted into chaos. The warriors hesitated. Just for a moment. Just long enough for doubt to flicker across their faces as they looked at their alpha king kneeling before his mate, saw the suppression runes crumbling under his touch, witnessed the silver light beginning to bleed from Celine's skin. But Garrick's command rang out again, sharper this time. She'll destroy everything. Stop them now or watch the pack burn. And that was enough. 3 warriors shifted mid-stride, their wolves erupting forward. But Damien was faster. He rose in one fluid motion, his own shift rippling through him, and met the first attacker head-on. The impact echoed through the chamber like thunder. Celine tried to stand, tried to help, but her body was caught between states. The suppression breaking, but not broken. Her wolf clawing its way to the surface, but not yet free. She collapsed back onto the altar, gasping, as power unlike anything she'd ever felt surged through her veins like liquid fire. The mark on her ribs blazed so bright it lit the entire chamber in silver radiance. Kieran and the loyal warriors who'd been standing guard burst in behind Garrick's forces. The ritual chamber became a battlefield, wolves snarling and snapping, claws scraping stone, blood beginning to stain the ancient floor. But through it all, Celine felt something building inside her. Something vast and terrible and beautiful. Her wolf wasn't just rising. She was awakening. The final suppression rune over her heart cracked with an audible snap. And everything stopped. Not physically. The wolves were still fighting, still tearing at each other. But time seemed to slow, the air growing thick and heavy as though the world itself was holding its breath. Celine's eyes snapped open, and they were pure silver. Glowing. Burning with light that had no mortal source. She stood, and the movement was fluid, inhuman, touched by something divine. Enough. Her voice rang out, and it wasn't just hers anymore. It carried the weight of the moon herself, the authority of ancient forces that had shaped wolfkind from the beginning. Every wolf in the chamber, friend and foe alike, was driven to their knees by the sheer force of it. Even Damien, though he fought against the compulsion, found himself lowering his head in instinctive submission to something greater than any alpha. Garrick stared up at her from where he'd collapsed, his face ashen with terror. Impossible, he breathed. The suppression should have. Should have what? Celine said, and her voice echoed strangely, as though multiple voices spoke in harmony. Broken me. Made me weak. Made me something you could control. She stepped down from the altar, and with each step, silver flames began to lick up from the stone beneath her feet. Not consuming. Not destroying. But marking. Claiming. You tried to cage divinity, she said. And now you'll answer for it. The transformation began. But it wasn't like any shift the wolves had ever witnessed. There was no cracking of bones, no tearing of flesh. Instead, Celine seemed to dissolve into silver light, her human form unraveling like mist, and from that light emerged something magnificent. A wolf. But not just any wolf. She was massive, larger than any alpha, larger even than Damien in his wolf form. Her fur was white as moonlight, shot through with veins of silver that pulsed like living starlight. Her eyes burned with that same divine radiance, ancient and knowing and absolutely merciless. And where her paws touched the ground, silver flames bloomed. The Luna Eternal. The prophecy made flesh. Garrick scrambled backward, his courage finally breaking. Please, he gasped. We were trying to protect the pack. You have to understand. I understand perfectly, Celine's voice echoed from the wolf's form, impossible and terrifying. You saw power you couldn't control. So you tried to destroy it. You locked me away. Starved me. Carved your spells into my skin. Made my mate mourn a corpse while I suffered in the dark. She took a step forward, and Garrick pressed himself against the wall. You didn't do it to protect the pack. You did it to protect yourselves. Your authority. Your precious control. The other elders had appeared in the doorway, Theron, Stellan, Kaelin, Valen, drawn by the commotion. They stared at Celine's transformed state with expressions of absolute horror. This is your doing, she said, her burning gaze sweeping across all of them. So let me show you what you tried so desperately to prevent. The silver flames around her paws intensified, spreading across the floor in intricate patterns that looked almost like runes. But these weren't binding symbols. These were revelations. Images began to form in the flames. Memories. Truth. The pack members crowding the doorway gasped as they truly saw, what had been done. Celine being dragged to the ritual chamber 3 years ago. The elders holding her down. The knife carving suppression runes into her flesh while she screamed. The collar snapping around her throat. The door to the forbidden wing sealing shut while she pounded against it from the inside. 3 years of suffering displayed in merciless detail. And then, the journal entries. Garrick's plans. The conspiracy to break the bond. The intention to force Damien to take another mate. Every manipulation. Every lie. Every betrayal. The pack saw it all. No, Garrick whispered. No, they weren't supposed to. Supposed to what, Celine said. Supposed to know the truth. Supposed to see what you did to their Luna. Supposed to understand that you've been poisoning this pack from the inside for years. She turned her attention to the gathered wolves. You felt it, didn't you? The borders failing. The inability to shift. The land itself rejecting you. You thought it was an attack from outside. A curse. Some external enemy. Her voice dropped, heavy with grief and fury. But it was the suppression. Every day I remained bound. Every day my power was caged. The balance deteriorated. Because the moon doesn't take kindly to her chosen being imprisoned. Because destiny itself has been trying to correct what they broke. She looked at Damien, who had shifted back to human form and stood watching her with an expression of awe and love and something close to worship. He found me. He freed me. He chose me over the lies and the fear. And now I'm offering you the same choice. Her gaze swept the crowd. Stand with your Luna. Accept that change is coming, that the old ways of control and manipulation are ending. Help me build something better. The silver flames pulsed brighter. Or stand with them. With elders who would sacrifice their own Luna to maintain power. Who would let the entire pack die rather than relinquish control. Silence stretched taut. And then Kieran stepped forward. He dropped to one knee before Celine's wolf form, his head bowed. I stand with my Luna, he said clearly. One by one, other wolves followed. The warriors who'd been guarding the chamber. Young pack members who'd grown up under the elders' rule but had always felt something was wrong. Even some of the older wolves, who remembered what packs were supposed to be before politics corrupted everything. Within minutes, more than half the gathered wolves had knelt. But not all of them. Ronan stood among those still standing, his face conflicted. Others looked to the elders, uncertain, afraid of change even when confronted with truth. Garrick seized on that hesitation. She's manipulating you, he called out. Using her power to cloud your minds. This is exactly what the prophecy warned about. She'll destroy everything we've built. Celine's laugh was bitter. What have you built, Garrick? A pack where the Luna can be erased and no one questions it. Where warriors attack their own alpha king on your command. Where loyalty is bought through fear and lies. She took a step toward him, and he flinched. I'm not here to destroy what you've built. I'm here to burn away the rot and let something healthy grow in its place. The flames around her paws surged outward, not to harm but to surround. They wove between the wolves like living things, and where they touched, Celine felt their truths. Their fears. Their loyalties. She could kill the elders right now. Could burn them to ash with a thought. The power thrumming through her veins was more than sufficient. It would be justice. Vengeance for 3 years of suffering. But that wasn't who she wanted to be. The flames pulled back, condensing around her form. I'm not your executioner, she said to the elders. But I am your Luna. And by the laws you claim to uphold, you have committed treason. You imprisoned your alpha's mate. You conspired against the bond. You endangered the entire pack with your actions. She looked at Damien. The judgment is yours, Alpha King. What would you have done with traitors? Damien stepped forward, and every eye turned to him. He looked at the elders who'd served under his father, who'd guided him when he first took the throne, who'd betrayed him in ways that cut deeper than any physical wound. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. You will be stripped of your titles. Your seats on the council are forfeit. You will never again hold power over this pack or any other. Garrick's face twisted with fury. You can't. I can. I am the Alpha King, and my word is law. You plotted against your Luna. Against me. Against the very foundations of what we're supposed to be. His eyes hardened. You're lucky I'm letting you live. If it were up to my wolf, I'd let Selene burn you all to ash. He turned to address the full gathering. This pack has been poisoned by corruption. By wolves who cared more about power than people. That ends now. We will rebuild. We will heal. And we will do it together, as we should have from the beginning. He crossed to where Selene stood in her magnificent wolf form and placed his hand on her head, a gesture of trust and unity. All hail the Luna Eternal, he said. All hail Selene, chosen of the moon, made of the Alpha King and rightful Luna of this pack. The words rippled through the gathering. And then, like a wave, the wolves who'd been kneeling took up the call. All hail the Luna Eternal. Even some who'd been standing hesitantly joined in. The sound grew, filling the chamber, echoing through the corridors, reaching out into the territory beyond. Selene felt the bond between her and Damien surge, no longer suppressed, no longer incomplete. It snapped fully into place, and the sensation was overwhelming, love and loyalty and connection, so profound it brought tears to her eyes even in wolf form. The silver flames around her finally began to fade, their work done. She shifted back to human, the transformation smooth and painless now that nothing was fighting it. Damien immediately wrapped his cloak around her shoulders, and she leaned into him, suddenly exhausted. The power was still there, thrumming beneath her skin. But it was hers now. Controlled. Claimed. The elders were escorted out by Kieran and the loyal warriors. They went quietly, broken, their authority stripped away. And the pack began to disperse, whispers already spreading about what they'd witnessed. About the Luna who'd returned from the dead. About the prophecy fulfilled. But Selene barely noticed. She stood in Damien's arms, feeling his heartbeat against her cheek, and finally, allowed herself to believe that the nightmare was over. That she was free. That she had won. 3 days after the ritual chamber, Selene stood at the edge of the northern border. The territory had changed. Or maybe she was just seeing it clearly for the first time in years. The air tasted different now, cleaner, sharper, alive with a magic that hummed beneath the surface of everything. The land that had been dying was healing. Slowly, but healing. Wolves who'd been unable to shift found their forms returning. Borders that had flickered now held strong. The corruption that had been eating away at the pack's foundation was burning away, replaced by something stronger. Something true. Behind her, she heard footsteps approaching. She didn't need to turn to know it was Damien. The bond between them sang with his proximity, a constant warmth in her chest that still felt new and precious despite how right it was. He came to stand beside her, his hand finding hers naturally, easily. How do you feel? He asked. She considered the question. 3 days ago, she'd reclaimed her wolf. 3 days ago, she'd stood before the pack in her true form and watched as everything the elders had built crumbled to ash. 3 days ago, she'd finally been free. And yet, I feel like I'm standing on the edge of something, she said quietly. Like everything that's happened so far was just the beginning. Damien's hand tightened around hers. The oracle said you'd have to judge the packs. Decide if we're worthy of survival. I know. She'd been trying not to think about it. Trying to focus on the immediate, on healing the territory, on rebuilding trust within the pack, on learning to control the vast power that now lived beneath her skin like a second heartbeat. But the mark on her ribs still burned. still pulsed with divine purpose. And she knew, deep in her bones, that this wasn't over. The Luna Eternal wasn't just a title. It was a responsibility. "Do you think I'm a hero?" she asked suddenly. "Or just someone who survived something terrible and came out the other side with power I don't know how to use?" Damien was quiet for a long moment. "I think you're someone who refused to let them break you. Who endured 3 years of torture and isolation and came out still believing there was something worth fighting for. Who could have burned us all to ash but chose mercy instead." He turned to face her fully. "Hero feels too small a word for that." She met his eyes, seeing the absolute certainty there. The love. The loyalty that went bone deep. "What if I get it wrong?" she whispered. "What if I'm supposed to judge the packs and I make the wrong choice? Save something that should burn or destroy something that deserves to live? Then we'll figure it out together. Like we've been doing. Like we'll keep doing for however long this takes." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "You're not alone anymore, Celine. You don't have to carry this by yourself." She wanted to believe that. Wanted to trust that she could be both the Luna Eternal and just Celine. That she could fulfill whatever destiny the moon had carved into her bones without losing herself in the process. But she'd spent 3 years learning that hope was dangerous. That trust could be weaponized. That power always came with a price. Still, standing here with Damien beside her and the territory healing beneath her feet and her wolf finally free to run. Maybe hope was worth the risk. "The other territories are going to hear about this," she said. "About what happened here. About what I am." "They already have," Damien said. "Kieran intercepted 3 messengers this morning. Alphas demanding explanations. Councils wanting to know if the Luna Eternal is a threat or a salvation." "And what did you tell them?" "That they'll find out when I'm ready to tell them. Not before." She almost smiled. "They're not going to like that. They don't have to like it. They just have to respect it." He pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her waist. "We have time, Celine. Time to heal. Time to prepare. Time to figure out what comes next." The prophecy doesn't have a deadline, but she could feel it pressing against her consciousness. The weight of expectation. The sense that somewhere, beyond this territory, forces were already moving. Packs that would see her as a threat. Wolves who would try to destroy her before she could judge them. Councils that would do exactly what Garrick had done, try to cage what they couldn't control. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time, when the challenges came, when the enemies revealed themselves, when the hard choices had to be made, she wouldn't face them alone. She turned in Damien's arms, rising on her toes to press her forehead against his. "Ask me again," she whispered. He knew immediately what she meant. His eyes softened, and a smile tugged at his lips. "Celine, Luna Eternal, chosen of the moon, survivor of horrors that should have broken you." He cupped her face in his hands. "Will you let me court you properly? Will you give me the chance to prove every day that you are worth finding? Worth fighting for? Worth everything?" She felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were good tears. Healing tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes to all of it." He kissed her then, soft and reverent and full of promises neither of them knew if they could keep. But they would try. They would fight for it. Because some things were worth burning the world down to protect. When they finally pulled apart, the sun was setting behind them, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. And in the growing darkness, the first stars were beginning to emerge, including one that burned brighter than all the others. Silver white and steady. The moon, watching over her daughter. Celine looked up at it and felt something settle in her chest. Not peace, exactly. Not certainty. But purpose. She was the Luna Eternal. The flame that couldn't be extinguished. The one who would judge the wolf nations and decide their fate. But she was also just Celine. A woman who'd survived the unthinkable. Who'd found love in the aftermath of betrayal. Who'd chosen mercy over vengeance even when vengeance would have been easier. And maybe that was exactly who the Luna Eternal was supposed to be. Not a perfect hero. Not an infallible judge. Just someone trying her best with power she was still learning to control, and a destiny she hadn't asked for but would face anyway. Because the alternative was going back to the dark. And she'd spent enough time there to last a lifetime. So here's the question I'll leave you with. Would you have chosen her side? Would you have knelt before a Luna who returned from death with power that could reshape reality? Or would you have stood with the elders, clinging to the familiar even when it was built on lies? Would you have trusted Damien when he chose his mate over his counsel? Or would you have called him weak, corrupted, blinded by the bond? Would you have believed Celine when she said she wanted to build something better? Or would you have seen only the flames and assumed destruction? Because that's the thing about stories like this. About women who survive terrible things and come out the other side with power. We want to believe we'd choose their side. That we'd be brave enough, wise enough, good enough to recognize truth when we see it. But history is full of people who chose comfort over justice. Who caged what they feared instead of trying to understand it. Who let others suffer in silence rather than asking uncomfortable questions. Celine was erased from history once. Locked away and forgotten while the world moved on without her. Will you remember her story? Will you carry it with you when you see others being silenced, suppressed, told they're too much or not enough or too dangerous to exist as they are? Or will you look away? The choice, as always, is yours. If this story lit something inside you, if Celine's fire found an echo in your own heart, then subscribe to Shayla's Romance Library. Because here, we don't just tell tales of pretty wolves and fated mates. We tell stories that burn. Stories of women who refuse to be caged. Of love that survives the unsurvivable. Of power that demands to be claimed. We tell stories about the ones who were supposed to stay buried. And we celebrate when they rise. So hit that subscribe button. Ring the bell. Come back for the next tale that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about strength and survival, and what it means to be worthy of love. Because Celine's story might be over for now. But there are others waiting in the dark. Others who've been silenced. Others who carry flames of their own. And they're ready to burn.